The piece that's really interesting for me that I think is still early days of the conversation is with employees using AI at work, a big legal risk is a disconnect between what their job is and what they're getting paid for. The example that I always like to say is what happens if they are able to do their job in half the time because they're really employing all the tools very well and they're sitting around watching Netflix all afternoon. Does that mean that they're engaging in time theft or are they just being a great employee, getting their stuff done using the tools and excellent work-life balance?
Workplace law is complex and constantly changing. It can be hard to keep up, and the risk of getting it wrong can be costly for businesses. The Coffee and Law podcast is here to help HR professionals and employers stay informed. We'll cover what's changing and how to navigate real workplace situations and everyday people decisions. So grab your favorite warm drink and join us for engaging, practical, and educational conversations with top experts in workplace and employment law.
This podcast provides high-level general information. The perspectives shared by our guests are for educational purposes and do not constitute legal advice. If you have a specific question or concern, please consult a qualified lawyer.
Hi everyone, it's Amy Davies, founder and CEO of First 30 and also your Coffee and Law podcast host here. To remind you that First 30 offers career transition and outplacement services. So if you have terminations and layoffs coming up, this is a really good way to mitigate risk to your business and help your exiting employees recover from the job loss and get back to work. You can find out more information at www.first30ready.com/outplacement, or you can reach out to me, Amy, AMY, at first30ready.com. All of our programs include live coaching and a year of access. And in a tough job market, that can be very important. Now, back to our show. Hello, and thanks everyone so much for joining us. We are talking about, everyone's talking about AI these days, so I thought we better start talking more about AI on the Coffee and Law podcast. So that's what we'll be discussing today, and I'm excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, I would ask if you're here and you're enjoying the content, share. If you're listening on audio, please give us a 5-star rating. We'd really appreciate it. It goes such a long way. So that would be great. And then I wanted to mention that we work in partnership with HR Law Canada. And that is if you go visit their site, they've got a lot of information on HR law. So it's excellent. I read it regularly. And my guest today is Lisa Stam. And the way that I met Lisa was we were both at an HR law conference last year, and she gave an amazing presentation on AI. So I connected with her. I didn't even know I was going to be doing this podcast at the time, Lisa, but I was like, I need to stay in touch with Lisa because she was amazing. And you had so much insight into what is happening. So naturally, I've made sure that we got her here. So Lisa, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
So why don't you tell us first a little bit more about your law firm, SpringLaw? I'd love to hear about it.
Sure, thank you. So I founded SpringLaw in 2017 as a fully virtual law firm, so pre-COVID, and just myself and a part-time assistant, and we've grown it out to about 15 people now. We only do employment law, labor, workplace issues. We help both employers and employees, but we really focus on how do we do this in a tech forward way. I've always been a bit of a tech nerd in on different fronts, so we are always focused on that with the behind the scenes piece being very tech forward, but with the clients, it's all about that human delivery. So, AI is a natural extension of all this. We have a ton of AI tools that we use behind the scenes, much of which a client wouldn't even see because we still want that human connection to advise them.
In this, you're just letting us know that you're always ahead with what you were doing. And I will say that it's so great when you can use automation to enable human
Mhm.
connection. And certainly I've done that with First 30, but I've always reminded our clients, we're still here. Don't worry about the automation. You still can message anytime and you will have a real person responding to you. But it's amazing how much time you can save and how much more effective and efficient you can be for your clients.
Yeah, and I mean, in the early years, we explored a bit more about how can we be more self-serve or DIY, and how can we, pull our clients in to participate in a lot of the tech, even just something like forms. But in the world of employment law, so often people are coming to us in a crisis, whether it's employee side, they've just been let go, or an employer who has to make all these hard decisions, and or they just received a demand letter, whatever. Everyone comes to you usually in some sort of crisis. They don't want to futz around on learning a new piece of tech, and so we've really evolved on that over the years. That we have it. People are welcome to use our portal, do like all the things, but usually people just want to have a video call and talk to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So today we are, as I said, we're talking about HR in the age of AI, which is
Mhm.
it's such a complicated. I find it exciting, but I know that a lot of people are finding it quite complicated time. And I wanted to start with a question around policies. Not the most exciting topic, but a really important one. And I want to know from you, does every organization need an AI policy and what should it cover?
So as an employment lawyer, I am automated to say, "Yes, of course you need a policy on this."
Yes.
So for sure, but especially AI right now because nobody knows what they're doing yet. We're all learning together. It's early years. We don't know how our employees are using it, but they absolutely are using it, whether it's on on their phone or on the company's systems. But they are using it, and so I think every employer should really turn their mind to having an AI policy of some sort for two reasons: to help give employees guardrails on how to use it, and make sure that they're not, putting all kinds of customer or client information up into the universe. But it's also for the company, small or large, to have that opportunity to turn their mind to, okay, how are we going to use this AI? How are we going to um, have our what guardrails are we going to have for employees? And the act of making the policy is probably almost as important as coming up with the final product of the policy.
So in the act of making the policy, I gather you mean that that gets leaders thinking about
Yes.
what should the guardrails and what is our risk
Mhm.
in terms of AI. Now,
Mhm.
policies are something that you can leave in place for 20 years, but as we know, AI is changing every
Mhm.
day, every hour, it seems. How often are you suggesting to your clients that they relook at their AI policy given the constant change that we're seeing?
Yeah, for other policies, even an annual cadence is probably fine.
Mhm.
But for these AI policies, it really should be a living document right now. And if there's some sort of update, if the company is bringing in a new tool, or something happens and you now you've learned something, so now you need to update your policy. I would really think of it as a living document right now of what are our guardrails and guidance to everyone on how to use it. So more frequent, ideally, every 3 months at the most. I say that
Right. Wow.
knowing that in the real world, that a few can actually do that, especially, owner operator, small employers that don't have a whole department to do this for them. I appreciate
Yeah.
that may not be realistic, but tweaking it, as we go, I think is quite important.
You mentioned employees and how they use AI, but I'm curious, can employers require employees to disclose when and how they're actually using AI?
Yeah, yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think that they should, in fact,
Mhm.
require this. They're to manage their own legal and operational risks that AI can really bring out. The reality is, when an employee is working, in the normal course of employment, the stuff they do is the company's property. And so, and if they're on the company's systems, it's all company proprietary information. And if that is being compromised with AI, rogue AI use, where you're putting all kinds of stuff up into the cloud because you don't quite understand, right? I mean, part of it is that we are all learning together right now. And so an employer absolutely can require that as part of, what tools are you using to use your job right now? It would be no different than any other tool that an employee would be using.
Well, it makes it even more complicated that our lives, our private lives and our professional lives are so intertwined.
Yeah.
And I feel like the technology just goes along with that, right? So it
Yeah.
couldn't be a more interesting time to have all of these things converge, right? Well, what
Absolutely.
are some of the big legal risks that employers face when employees use AI for their work?
I mean, if you put this in your AI, what will come up always is as the privacy issues, the confidentiality issues, IP ownership. So a lot of these are standard issues that I think we've been dealing with beyond AI, right?
Sure.
Of the bring your own device world has been around for a decade. So this is some of this is not new, but having people understand what an LLM is and why it is that if you are putting information into the mothership, the whole world knows, everyone's on the mothership. And so having people understand why it is that it's not just a localized little Google search that you're doing. It's putting information into the ether that I think is something that is part of the policy, that which hopefully goes hand in hand with training about all of this. But so the confidentiality, that's an obvious thing. I think we all know conceptually that that is a risk. But how much and what does it mean? And if you're throwing in a document into a chat, whether it's Copilot or Gemini, whatever you're using, if it's a non-enterprise version, it may remember it in the next chat, and that's the piece that, for everyone to remember. The other piece around this is for people who have sensitive positions in the organization, HR, the owner operator, like people who are um, dealing with issues that you don't want other employees to know about. And so this is where I think it's really important to map behind the scenes let's take Copilot as an example. So we have the enterprise version of Copilot so that it gives us a bit more control. And I highly recommend for any AI tool being rolled out in an organization, do not use the free version because that's open. Y- Uh, pay for now. A lot of these tools aren't overwhelmingly expensive, but it allows you to map out behind the scenes a little more who has access, and more importantly, what access does that tool have to the organization's information. So which
Hmm.
SharePoint drive is it accessing? Is it,
Hmm.
are we letting everyone see what's in the HR drive? And if you just add, if you put in a question, what's the average salary in our organization? You don't want your co-pilot to be accessing all of the HR stuff to answer that question. So this is where I think having an enterprise version will allow you to help ring fence that and make sure your IT people are helping out with that. We've been working with the same company for years, and were very helpful in helping us really. When we rolled out Copilot, they really mapped out behind the scenes what it has access to and what it doesn't. Just as an example, whether you're using Claude or Perplex, like whatever tool you're using, make sure that it's really understanding the confidentiality.
I've just had a question. I'm thinking as an employee now, and I know HR will be concerned about this too. So I'm an employee. I'm having a difficult situation with my manager, and I use Copilot to help me navigate that difficult situation.
Mm.
Who can see what I'm asking? Or if let's say a client asked me to go out drinking at lunchtime, right? And then I start asking about our
Mhm.
drinking during the day, like what's our policy? Or I ask it in retrospect. Oh, I went out drinking with a
Yeah.
client,
Yeah.
right? So I'm just using these as examples. But if I'm putting that in, I imagine my employer might be able to see what I'm asking and what is their obligation to me to say, hey, Amy, when you're using our Copilot, we can see everything you're asking.
Yeah, and yet not really, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
because it's if you're using your own, so if you have like an enterprise version of it and you're asking questions, your own questions would be in your own section, depending on how it's all configured, obviously, right? But
Mm-hmm.
if you have a shared agent, for example, within Copilot that has been shared out to the whole team, then there's probably a lot more history that is either being seen or being pulled into new questions, right? So in your example, if
Mm-hmm.
the HR director was to say, "Tell me, have there been a lot of conversations about drinking on the job?" Maybe some of the information
Yeah.
might show up, but it's not going to necessarily be a laundry list of it all, right? I mean, you can
Okay.
prompt this like crazy, and I say this with a giant caveat that it totally depends on how everything's configured in your organization and whether or not it's a centralized agent, for example, or whether or not it's, your own corner of whatever LM tool you're using.
It all feels so risky. It's like
I
you
know.
don't know, right? You don't know what you don't
Yeah.
know. So yeah.
But in a
Well,
way, we've always been able to see what's on the server, right? And emails and, like, it's no different. I would like to think, you know, if you're drinking on the job, Amy, you're not emailing all your friends as well about this, right? Because it's on the server and everyone can see
right.
it. So I don't see
You're
it all
right.
that different. But we live in a world where people write everything down, and I'm constantly shocked at what people put in writing
Mm-hmm.
that implicates them so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I am constantly telling my teens the internet is forever. Stop putting, I mean, they don't, but like, don't put stuff online that you don't want to read or that you don't want your employer to read in 10 years. I think there's so much out there already on making sure there's human judgment. The piece that's really interesting for me that I think is still early days of the conversation is with employees using AI at work, a big legal risk is a disconnect between what their job is and what they're getting paid for, and really understanding what is the value of the work they're doing. Are they being paid because they're churning out at an hour at a time, or or the number of calls that they take if they're in a call center? Some of that, there's some clear objective metrics. But if it's anywhere in a bit of a knowledge industry type of job where you're able to put out your input at 50% faster. It's an HR legal kind of risk about what does their contract now look like?
Yeah.
Are they and the example that I always like to say is what happens if they are able to do their job in half the time because they're really employing all the tools very well and they're sitting around watching Netflix all afternoon. Does that mean that they're engaging in time theft, or are they just being a great employee, getting their stuff done using the tools and excellent work-life balance, And I think we're in such early days that nobody really knows the answer to that yet. And I'm curious where that's going to go. This disconnect between how we value work traditionally and what AI is doing to really knock that around right now.
Well, it's such an interesting perspective because I was in similar field for about 20 years. And by the end of my corporate career, I was thinking, "Ah, does anyone know how easy it is for me to do this? Seems really complicated
Right.
to them." But as someone who had been doing it for a very long time, I just kind of started to feel like, well, you're paying for access to my expertise
Mhm.
along with the
Mhm.
hours. I wasn't, listen, I wasn't committing time theft or anything like that, but sometimes I got a lot of credit for doing something that I was like, oh, like anybody could do this. Of
Mhm.
course they couldn't, right? So
Yeah.
that I think companies, it will take time for them to realize, okay, what jobs are we kind of overstaffing, or this shouldn't be so much of someone's job anymore, but we're all going through the process of learning what that looks like now.
In your case, though, after 20 years, typically what has happened traditionally is that you get promoted into other roles where that time gets filled up with management or,
Mhm.
committees
Yep.
or strategy, like all that stuff. And so I'm thinking more your sort of not quite frontline, but like middle of the pack kind of role that maybe isn't
Mhm.
management yet. We're going to see some real
Mhm.
shifts in what that job description looks like.
Outplacement and career transition support make a real difference for employees experiencing terminations or layoffs. Offering these services also reduces legal and reputational risk for employers. All of First 30's outplacement programs include access to a live coach, along with 1 year of access to our career transition portal, job search resources, and much more. Programs start at $985 per participant. You can find information about our programs and pricing at first30ready.com/outplacement, or reach out to us anytime at info@first30ready.com. Now, a lot of what I hear when I'm out and about, like you at events, is how HR is using AI for hiring. Maybe more so now, more recently, performance management, disciplinary decisions. How do we use AI in these ways without creating legal risk? And, I think the place that it's most HR is most active is in the hiring.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are risks in there, especially now with the new laws around note taking during interviews too, and making sure we have those notes for 3 years. But it's also about like, how are we setting up our agent to analyze resumes? So
Mhm.
can you talk to us a little bit about what employers and HR leaders might be thinking about?
Part of this is a traditional answer is just, document the heck out of everything. Document your process so that it's very clear that, especially in the hiring process, it's so important to have a very consistent approach to each candidate to protect you
Hmm.
from human rights claims. If you didn't hire someone and they think that you asked inappropriate questions, if you ask the same set of questions to everybody, it's an excellent, defense for the company. And so, that applies to the world of AI as well. If you're using these tools, first of all, understanding as much as we can how it works. And we're not coders, we're not expected to really open up the black box. But I do think asking a ton of questions to the vendor before you roll it out, for example, to understand how are decisions being made? How is information being analyzed in the tool? And how do we make sure that we can configure that in a non discriminatory way, for example? And HR already has the expertise to know what kinds of questions not to ask. Um, but it's never going to be perfect. And we don't expect perfection from humans, and yet we expect perfection from machines, right? It's an
Sure.
interesting disconnect where I think we can really help, address the risk and help the organizations document everything so that it's clear what our consistent system is, but always make sure there's a human actually making the final decision on everything, especially for
Hmm.
now. Maybe the
Hmm.
robots will take over in a decade or two, but for right now, our machines are the robots aren't smart enough yet. And so we have to have a human making these judgment calls and decisions. So in the process, having steps along the way where a human, there's a set of eyeballs actually looking at all of this. Having said that, if you're, organization that gets 1,000 resumes for one role, you have to have technology to sort through that, and there's excellent tools out there now, for sure, to go through all that. So I don't ever think that people shouldn't use any of these tools, but supplement it always with people and making sure that there's a human decision maker at the end of the day. That again is such an important defense for the company, for that person to be able to explain why they made the decision. There was 5 candidates left, and here are all the points that was listed for each of these, and this is how we ranked it, and here's the why. And being able to justify that, I think is just so critical.
Well, and it's important for us to remember that not all agents are set up equally, or chatbots, let's
Right,
call them, are
right.
set up equally. It's about training
Mhm,
it by prompting it, and
mhm.
and then testing what you've developed, right? And I
Yeah,
think
that's a good point.
too often we can just say, "Oh, we have I know because we actually developed a chatbot," and everyone's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, just another chatbot." But I'm like, no, it's what goes into
Mm.
programming that chatbot. It could be far more sophisticated than another one. So it's just
Mhm.
interesting that all of these things are not built equal, and that human touch is, and then going back and rejigging as we need to, is so important.
Yeah, and piloting it, right? Testing it out before you fully roll it out in the real world. I do think that's such a critical piece of this.
So, what should HR leaders be doing today to prepare for the future of AI in the workplace?
I think really taking a look at all the likely places that AI is going to replace all that routine work that your team may have. And it's sprinkled across all roles. It's not just necessarily one particular role, but all of us will have parts of our job that are easily replaceable by AI,
Mhm.
especially as it continues to in such an accelerated pace to impact
Mhm.
and be able to replace our jobs in an effective way. And so I'm hoping that workplaces will take a look at not just job roles, but at tasks, really focusing on tasks as opposed to the overall job. And part of it is that there aren't a whole bunch of experts out there right now. It is early days. We're all figuring out together. So the idea of firing this person in front of me because half their job is replaced by AI. First of all, someone else has to do the other half, and if your the rest of your team is at capacity, that you can't just, redistribute. But there's not likely another person on the market yet that has all this AI knowledge that you think that, you may want. So let's all just train together. Let's figure it out. And meanwhile, they already have the organizational knowledge. And now that we just keep training people on the AI part. So paying attention to what are the tasks that are so likely to be replaced, that's the crystal ball part. Thinking ahead about how do we train up those people particularly susceptible to it. And there's going to be collateral. There's going to be people who may not fit in the organization, but you know, um, um, you would have seen this in the presentation that, that where we met last fall. So I'm repeating myself, but in
Well, you're not
each
repeating yourself to the audience that's
fair
here
enough,
today,
that's
so
true.
don't
That's
worry
true.
about that.
In
It's not
each
just us here, Lisa.
That's a good point. In each, big technological development since the dawn of time, each big moment there's been this big worry that the sky is falling and all the jobs are gonna go away. But in each moment, it's just contracted or it hasn't contracted, it's expanded the market. Whether it's, the typewriter coming in, it's not that all of a sudden we all stopped writing stuff and typed only, and bring it right up to the internet. The internet has created so many jobs, so many commercial opportunities for people. And even in the world of AI, there's all these data centers now that are popping up. So someone's building them, someone is, planting lots of trees in lieu of them. Like there's all this residual impact on the economy of new jobs that we just didn't even think about 10 years ago, 2
We
years
didn't
ago.
know existed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there will be people who will be impacted by AI. All these big companies that are laying off big chunks of the workforce allegedly because they're implementing AI. I think it's a marketing ploy. For now, I don't think it's all that. It's not here enough to actually change too many jobs. Not yet. It will be down the road probably, but I think it's
Mhm.
more, we're offshoring a little more because it's a global workforce and valuing the people who are in front of you still and investing in them, training, of course have the policies, but build together because there aren't experts out there yet to do it instead.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's such an excellent point. Now, listen, we have a little time left, so I want to make sure we spill the tea. So tell us, you have a little spill the tea, maybe AI related? I don't know. I don't want to put any pressure on you.
No, you know what? I don't the one that comes to mind is not AI related, and
Sure.
there's nothing terribly sexy yet about AI, right? It's a tool,
So
that's
just
all
so
it is.
so everyone knows, I should explain because I'm sure, Lisa, there'll be new listeners to this episode that we spill the tea. It's like
Right.
an exciting, fun, maybe it's a serious story, but somewhere where we have a little gossip at the end of the show, just to kind of lighten things up potentially a little bit.
So I had a case a few years ago, and I'm a Volt. I never talk about clients or client work, but this is a generic one that
Sure.
that was like a funny but not funny at the time. So
Okay.
I've done tons of negotiations for whether it's on the employee side. I mostly do employer work now, and but in that case, I was on for an employee, and we wrote a very strong demand letter to the employer based on the client's indignation in front of me. Like he was so convinced that he had been so wronged by the employer. And we had all these regular good strong facts there for a while, like all the regular Bartle type factors. And he got a very lean package. So, I wrote my usual feisty demand letter, and then the employer took their time. And it just took a long time to respond. So, I'm increasingly convinced that they're a terrible employer. So I wrote a pretty strong email saying, let's get a response, please. Um, and then I got an email from opposing counsel that was very well played. It was just, please see enclosed. And enclosed was all of these text messages that my client forgot to tell me about that were
Oh no.
all about such clear sexual harassment against his subordinate. So I mean that's the not funny part. But the funny part is that he just didn't think to raise that while we're fighting with all this indignation. So the series of texts were with the person who reported to him. Things like, you should wear that
Oh
beautiful
my
sweater that I
goodness.
like, and just how beautiful she was, comments on just what she should wear, like it was so overt. There was nothing both were married to other people, and the whole time she didn't she wasn't participating. She was
Sure.
responding in a neutral sort of like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, see you tomorrow," kind of response.
Right.
So it but
Right.
what so when I talked to him, I said, "Okay, buddy, tell me about this." Like this kind of changes our strategy a bit. And he just didn't think it was a big deal. He thought it was a mutual private affair that had nothing to do with anything. And the way he interpreted the texts were so um concerning to me, that there's still people out there that think that unless the other person is so aggressively no back to you, that somehow they're like acquiescing to this alleged relationship. And so clearly at some point the powers that be got wind of it. And so it as you can imagine, our strategy is like, okay, fine, we'll just take ESA.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you. We'll take the little
Yeah.
lean package you've given us. Have a
Yeah.
nice day.
Yeah. And he's like, well, we're all
Wow.
adults here. We're allowed to do this. I'm like,
No, you're not. That to me, that's crazy. And so often in life, people see what they want to see.
yes.
That
Oh
is no
yeah.
excuse.
Hmm.
Absolutely. There's never an excuse for this type of
Yeah.
behavior. It's just horrible and disgusting. And I feel very sorry for his subordinate who was on the
Yeah.
other side
Yeah.
of this. And you can totally see her responding with just this very lukewarm, appropriate. No, well, there's no appropriate response to that. Let's face it. It's very difficult to handle that type of situation. But
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
goodness, that is a crazy story. Such
It's
an
crazy.
interesting life lesson for you as well.
Oh, so I mean, this is I don't know, probably 10 years ago, and
Sure.
ever since, it was a very big lesson for me that you never know. There are always 3 sides to every story. You just never know, and you can drill your own client as much as you want, but they may not appreciate what's if something has a big impact, right? Like if they've just found a new job, they've mitigated. You need to tell me about that because that also changes your case. And so we've learned,
Sure.
we have a whole list of questions that we go through and they have to ask. But in this case, I use the word affair, and I don't know if that's the right word, because in his view,
Yeah.
there was no sexual content or contact,
Okay.
physical
Right.
contact. But it was so overt the whole time talking about her physicality, and he just thought
Oh,
it was no
oh,
big deal.
oh, I'm so grossed out by
I
this.
know, I know. Sometimes you don't
Well,
get to pick your own clients, that's true.
I have a little piece of advice for anyone listening because I'm just rolling up a piece of paper to make my point here. So my friend she's a senior leader in HR, and she told me that at the end of every interview that she conducts,
Mhm.
She will stop at the end of the interview, hold their resume in her hand like this, or maybe she has it open. She'll be holding their resume in her hand, and she'll look directly in their eyes and say, "Is there anything else? Okay, thank you for coming
Oh.
in. Now, is there anything else that you'd like to tell me?" And then she just lets it go silent.
Oh, that's a
And she's
powerful tool.
holding their resume to give them remind them that, there's information, like you've given someone access to information. And
Mhm.
she says to me, "Amy, you will not believe the things that come out at the end of that when she asks that question.
That's
It's
hilarious.
unbelievable. Nothing that she shouldn't be hearing, but things that are, something that might come up in a
Yeah.
criminal
Yeah.
background check, or
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
something that happened with a previous employer that they hadn't mentioned but is relevant to the
Mhm.
role. And she said it is the best strategy for finishing an interview that she has employed.
I use silence in cross examinations. You
Mm.
ask the question, let them answer, and then you just sit there and look at them. And then
Mhm.
and then they keep
Yes.
going, right? They gotta fill the silence,
Sure.
and that's where the tea gets spilled, for sure.
Exactly, exactly. It's such a good lesson. I remember I had a female leader in one organization I worked in, and she said, when you ask difficult questions in a business setting, Amy, you need to learn to shut up. Just
Mm.
actually bite your lip and say to yourself, "Amy, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up."
I know.
So I took that through my career, and you're right. It's amazing what comes out, and you just have to
Yeah.
be prepared to be uncomfortable with the silence.
Yes. Yeah, and for people like
Mhm.
us who are very chatty and outgoing, like, it is it's an intellectual exercise, not it doesn't come from the heart. I wanna chat.
Absolutely. But the
Yeah.
more you practice these things, the more
Mhm.
natural they start to feel. Well, listen, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Again, you can find Lisa's details in the show notes. I know that I learned a lot today, Lisa. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. Before we close, I also want to thank our producer, Storyfora. I often get asked who produces this podcast because it looks great, it sounds great. So they are Storyfora, and their information is also in the show notes. And don't forget to check out HR Law Canada as well for some great articles on topics like what we're discussing. And hopefully, Lisa, I'll see you at another HR Law event, which are also great in the near future.
Thank you very much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks again. Have a great day, everyone.